Redditors who have been in prison, what's the most heartwarming thing you've seen or heard in prison? Not prison, but in jail for a while, and there was a book I was reading that the library man gave me, and come to find out the last 40 pages were ripped out. This absolute gangster type dude heard me complaining, and he came over that evening and told me how he'd read that book before and knew how it ended, and he basically narrated the last 40 pages to me over the next 2 days. I wasn't in prison, but I went to Germany as an exchange student to a family where both parents worked in prisons. The dad worked in the infirmary and the mom was a guard. One day the mom, her 9-year-old daughter and me were in the city, shopping, when she saw someone she recognized. It was a woman that you wouldn't look at twice, wearing regular clothing, talking on her phone. My exchange mother walked up to her from behind and flicked her ear. The woman screamed and then both started laughing and hugging, had a small conversation and then they parted. When I asked who that was, the mother said it was an inmate. Not an ex-inmate, a person that was currently imprisoned. Seeing my shock, she reassured me that she would soon take a bus to go back. Apparently people that are close to their release time get the chance to go out to get everything ready, like get an apartment, job interviews, that kind of thing. It kind of made me happy. I did a couple years at a small Fed spot, and my first week there I was approached by an inmate who ran an organization through the prison chapel. Their mission was to make sure new arrivals were stocked up on necessities, hygiene items, clean underclothes, etc. They told me it wasn't expected that I should ever pay them back, but if I'm ever in a position to donate back to there, cause I could do so. A couple weeks later I got some money in and bought all the items they gave me. I found the gentleman and told him I wanted to donate. He was actually shocked, and even seemed a little touched. He didn't specifically say so, but I got the impression that people rarely give back. This is just one of several stories I have from my time there about inmates being absolute brothers to each other. I spent a year in prison, and I'll be honest with you, you hear a lot of stories about crazy shit happening, but most of prison is just pure boredom. No disturbing things, no heartwarming things, just existing with a bunch of other dudes trying to ride out the clock. Mix in some high school-esque drama with cliques and such, and there you go, basically prison in a nutshell. Each state has a handful of max security facilities where shit is probably pretty crazy on the daily, and not to mention third world country prisons, but bottom line is prison is not what you see on TV. Anyway, I have a couple stories where I felt or saw something remotely heartwarming, I guess. First was during my first week, on the yard, I had a greasy tweaker-looking dude come up to me and be like, "First time?" I'm like, "Only time, hopefully." He says, "Well, you look like you probably only have a year and a day. This is the minimum sentence to be sent to prison, and a lot of these guys aren't going home, so it could be worse, eh?" I'm like, "I know, just stressed about home, blah blah." He gives me some advice about basically accepting that my GF is inevitably going to fuck someone else and leave me, spoiler, she did, and how none of them wait. It's better to just forget about home and do your time. He's like, "Chin up, bud," and walks away. I never even told the dude I had a GF, he just assumed, which I thought was hilarious, in hindsight. If you want to call that heartwarming, but I guess it was nice to have some mild words of encouragement from a hardened criminal to a stressed-out 19-year-old me that's never been locked up a day in his life. Also, I witnessed one of the more respected corrections officers smuggle in tobacco. He saw me see him. Later in the day he called me down to the desk and he gave me this long talk about life, and how nobody has to be defined by their time there, blah blah blah, and how he respects someone like myself that keeps his word. He must have somehow dug into my case and saw I didn't cooperate with law enforcement for a reduced/suspended sentence and wanted to know I wasn't going to snitch on him, without flat out saying it. Super nice guy either way, NGL. And lastly, when I was a couple weeks shy of going home, I almost got into a fight with this skinhead dude over a dumb misunderstanding, only altercation I ever had, and my cellmate interjected, took a rap for something he wasn't even involved in, and defused the whole thing. Later on he tells me he wanted to make sure I go home on time. Solid fucking dude. There was nothing that was going to stop me from going home though. I wasn't going to fight that piece of shit to prove some dumbass point. But things do get weird if someone is trying to fight you. You either gotta fight or snitch, and I wasn't about to do either of those things. Side note, my cellmate died not too long after he eventually got out. Won't ever forget that guy, R.I.P. Cellmate. I spent a week in a detention center waiting on a bail hearing, Every morning with breakfast, we got a pack of instant coffee. Thing is, by the time we were let out of our cells, I was already awake and didn't need coffee. So after 3 days of saving these coffee packets just to not use them, I just walked out and was like, who wants coffee? Pod boss, inmate who is unofficially in charge of the cell block, someone you generally don't want to piss off, and his second in command are like, sure, we'll take him. Turns out these guys aren't all that scary. Second in command guy makes killer origami. I watched him make a fighter jet and a tank. He ended up giving me a paper crane. I didn't get to keep it, unfortunately. It was in my cell when I went to court and was released. When I was in juvenile prison, there was a dude whose baby sister passed away from cancer. When he got the news, he refused to go back to his cell because he wanted to call his mother to check in on her. The cops weren't going to let that fly. This led to the cops threatening to lock down and rush the block just to get him, so most of us ended up refusing to lock up in solidarity with him. It ended well though, because one of the counselors came in and talked him down and allowed him to call his mother, though I think we got away with it cause this guy was a model inmate to the administration, but also had a good name amongst us inmates cause he was honest and treated people fairly, didn't steal, didn't talk shit to anyone, paid his debts, didn't try to game others, etc. City Court Jail was in holding with a chick I had known from middle school. She was a popular girl, and that had scared nerdy me back then. In holding, she got me involved in the group conversation when I was previously just keeping to myself. Helped pass the time. Went to county for 10 days at 10%. Older lady was my cellie when I finally got mostly booked. She claimed the bottom bunk BC she had epilepsy and told me how to get the guard's attention if she had a seizure. I was tired AF, and at like 2 or 3 a.m. they called me to finish booking, but I didn't hear BC, I was asleep. Sally woke me up nicely but firmly, and I got booking done. If she hadn't given a fuck to know my name and wake me up, my release would have been delayed by at least several hours, maybe even a day depending on the bureaucracy. Small and unnecessary, but kind acts. Okay, I'll go because I shared a horror story in the other thread. I was in prison for a brief period in Dubai before being removed by my consulate. I was in minimum security, and most of the people there were in there for unpaid debts and petty crime. Most were broke, and a very large proportion came from developing nations in Southeast Asia and the MENA region. I'm not sure about the other wings in the prison, but certainly in my wing the head inmates ran a voluntary donation inmates who had access to cash or had family on the outside could make to help out the poorer ones. It helped remove the stigma of having to beg, and allowed people access primarily to phones, since there were no free calls. It also allowed basic hygiene because there was no soap, which, let's be honest, made it better for everyone, but also some people were in there so long their clothing would wear out, and we only had one set, so even if you washed them you had nothing else to wear. You could borrow a set and retain some dignity while yours dried. We also had to buy blankets and pillows. The inmates would pitch in to help make sure that each other's stays were at least remotely bearable. Otherwise, nothing was provided except 2 meals, breakfast and dinner, your shirt and pants, and a really horrid mattress. Edit. Also, I can't believe I forgot about probably the most wholesome thing I saw in there. Outside the wing, but behind the security doors, was a hallway, which had a TV in it. The inmates would crowd around this 30-inch TV 20 deep to watch Bollywood when it was allowed. When it wasn't, the hallway was the access to the mess and to the exercise yard. It was tiled about 12 tiles wide. They set up a game of human chess on the tiles. 32 inmates all knew their piece and their position. Some of the games lasted a few days if they got interrupted and had to disperse, but they always came back.